Hello everyone, I just wanted to make a quick video helping you out with some graphing if you've had some questions about how to graph these on your homework. So on homework 3.3 they talk a lot about graphing linear equations and linear functions. So say that we're given this function, f of x equals negative 4/3 x minus 1. Well, that is really the same thing. Remember, f of x is just a way to tell you that this is a function, right? And there's special things that we can do with functions that we can't do with just other equations. And so that's why it's important that it's written that way. But f of x really is just the same thing as y. And so sometimes it's a little bit easier just to change it so that it's y equals that, the rest of that equation. And then from here, I noticed that some people are struggling because they're plugging numbers in for x, but then their y, they're getting a decimal answer that they can't plot on this graph. And so let me show you what I mean by that. So say that you decided to choose 1 as, what you were going to substitute in place of x. Well, if I do negative 4/3 times 1, that's negative 4/3, and then I minus 1 from that, and I get negative 7/3, right? Or that's kind of the same thing as negative 2.3333, right? Repeating. Well, that's pretty difficult, right? You're not going to be able to graph it on this grid. And so what I wanted to point out to you here is you want to be able to come up with whole number answers. And how do you do that if you have a fraction here? Well, you've got to look at your denominator, right? The denominator is 3, so if you choose values for x that are multiples of 3, that will make that a lot easier, right? Well, 0 is always a really good one to pick also. So I'm going to pick negative 3, 0, and 3 for some x values. And you can pick more than that, but I just wanted to start off with those 3. All right, so if I do negative 4/3, I'll just kind of do some work down here. So negative 4/3 times negative 3/1, right, because I'm substituting that in place of x, and then subtract 1. All right, well, if I simplify this more, right, the 3's will divide out. I'm still left with a negative 1 there. So negative 4 times negative 1 is positive 4, and then minus 1 gives me 3. All right, so I found one of my points is over negative 3 up 3. Okay. Well, what about putting 0 in, right? 0 is always a good one because if I do negative 4/3 times 0, well, that's just 0 minus 1 gives me a negative 1. So over 0 down 1 would be another point. And then if I put 3 in place of x, right? So negative 4/3 times 3/1 this time, and then subtract 1. Well, here again, my 3's divide out, and so I'm just left with negative 4 minus 1, which is going to give me negative 5. So I got over positive 3 down 5, and that would be here. And when you're graphing this on your homework, you really only need 2 points, but when you're graphing it by hand, it's best to at least have 3 points just because it's sometimes kind of hard to see how the slope of that is working. Okay, so that's one way that you can do it. Plug in values. So if this denominator was 2, I would want to choose multiples of 2. If the denominator was 5, I'd want to choose multiples of 5 for my x. So it's kind of like you're making sure that you're picking x's that are going to make it easiest for you. Okay, but then the other way that you could go ahead about graphing this that they talk about as well is talking about the slope and the y-intercept. Okay, so this negative 4/3 is the slope, and this negative 1 is the y-intercept. So an intercept always it's a point on the graph, right? So when I'm saying negative 1 is the y-intercept, that means that 0 is my x and negative 1 is my y. All right, so look at this. So my y-intercept is 0, -1. So over 0, down 1 is here. And we can see that's the same point that we got there, right, doing it this other way. But then from here, rather than picking other points to graph, we're going to use our slope. So we first start off with our y-intercept. So graph 0, -1. And then from there, you're going to do the rise over run. All right, so I'm going to write that over here to the side. So the rise means going up or down from that point, and the run means going left or right, and depending on whether the number is positive or negative, that's what we'll do. Now, since it's negative, be careful. You're only going to make sure that you put that negative either with the top number or the bottom number, not both, because if I put it with both, -4 divided by -3, well, a negative divided by a negative gives me a positive number. And so that changes my slope completely. So I definitely don't want to do that, right? I can put it with the top, I can put it with the bottom, but not both. All right, so from this point, I'm going to go down 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And since it's a +3, I'm going to go right 3. And that would be there. And notice that's the same point that I got here. So I still ended up, having these points. It's just a different way to go about graphing them. And both of them are great ways. So pick which way works best for you, and I hope that's helpful.